For some reason, since we've moved, whenever I set up to film, Yoli is just right by my side. I don't know if she thinks I'm talking to someone and she wants to come and see who's here. But hello everyone, I hope you're doing well today. We have just got back from such a gorgeous, gorgeous dog walk. The sun is shining here today and it finally feels like spring is around the corner. It is such a wonderful feeling. But today I thought we could do another deep dive into some low light plants. This is a topic that I'm always getting asked questions about, and I have got some more really, really gorgeous ones. Oh, you're sleeping there. We're gonna sleep there. Some more really gorgeous plants that I wanted to take you through today. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And yeah, these are also some of my favourite kind of videos to make, so I hope you find it useful and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So I made a video about this time last year, kind of taking you through what low light actually meant, because it can be quite hard to tell sometimes. I've before looked at a spot in my house and been like, oh, that would be perfect for a plant. And then it turns out to be too dark for even a low light plant. But I said in that video, which I will also link down below if you want to go and watch it after this, but I said in that video at the time that sometimes we mistake thriving and surviving for two very different things. And there are a lot of houseplants that will survive in lower lighting conditions, but even if they are surviving, firstly, they could just slowly be dying. There are some plants that will take months to show you the signs that they're not happy. They might just kind of be holding on by a thread. And in the meantime, they are going to be much more susceptible to things like root rot, pests, disease, you name it. So looking at your plant's natural habitat, where that plant naturally grows, is probably the key thing to do if you're not quite sure where to get started. And I actually brought over a plant to show you first off that is not one of the 10 plants that I'm going to take you through today, but this is just quite a good example of a plant that has adapted to survive in lower lighting conditions. And this is my Thai pink lipstick plant, my Calathea, and I've spoken about this one in low light videos before because I think it's a really interesting example. If you look at the growth of the plant at the top here, you'll be able to see it's quite big and round and full. And for the last year and a half, I have been growing this plant. A year and a half or 2 years? The last while I have been growing this plant as a low light plant, and although it has continued to give me growth, you can just see the size of its growth has massively decreased. So I'm going to be really interested to see what happens now that I've moved house, because I have moved it into this room that you see behind me, which primarily is bright and direct light. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch how the plant now adapts to its new environment. But a lot of the time, that is one of the things that you're going to see if you're growing a plant that is not destined to be grown in low light, in a low light spot. You're going to often see its growth become much smaller. Sometimes it can become quite stretched out and leggy if it's a vining plant. And these are often just ways of your plant telling you that it's not getting quite enough light, basically. And although most of these ones are not going to be repeats of plants that I've shown you before in my last low light video, I did want to start with one just to show you how far it's come, because this is a plant that absolutely thrives in lower levels of light, and this is the Calathea orbifolia. I've spoken about this one so much over the years because it's just a beautiful plant to grow and really helps to brighten up dark spots because it has got such pretty kind of pale stripy foliage. And this is a plant that I personally would not recommend for beginners. It is one on the list that is probably a little bit more finicky. In fact, for me, I would probably say the most finicky out of all the ones I'm going to show you today. But I'll also include clips of these plants in the spots that I've chosen to put them in my new space now in my new house. I've only been living here a few weeks, so obviously I am just, oh my goodness, I'm monitoring all of my plants so carefully because there is a chance that they might not be happy in these spots long term. But one thing that I don't think I actually mentioned in my last low light plants video, but one thing that I found really useful is using a light meter like this one here. I just got this on Amazon to tell what is going to be good for each plant. And for ones like this that are a little bit finicky, what I did was I just took the light reading of the spot it was in before in my old flat, and I have just tried to replicate the exact light it was getting before in my new space. So in theory, it should be absolutely fine. You can also apparently get apps on your phone that do the same thing. I personally really like using this. I'm slightly obsessed with it at the moment. It just allows you to be able to actually tell what is bright and direct light, what is low light, all of these things. I will just look it up online. I'll be like, what is the reading for low light, for example, for plants? And then I will just match it to what's on my light meter. And honestly, it is that simple. But the Calathea orbifolia, once it gets going, is such a beautifully rewarding plant to grow. I love how its new growth comes in. It's so kind of trumpety like that. And as I say, it is a plant that, I mean, I don't have another one like it in my collection, let's put it that way. Although she can be a drama queen, for me, she is worth it. It is a plant that over the years I've had to chop back and restart a few times, mainly because it is so susceptible to pests. And I'm quite happy that now I've moved, I'm able to actually isolate this plant a little bit more. Like you'll see from the clips I'm putting in, the spot I've got it in at the moment does not have any other plants around it. And I'm going to do my best to keep it that way, just because having a little bit of distance between this plant and others means that firstly, it's going to be less likely to encounter pest issues. And secondly, if it does, it's not going to pass them on as easily. So yeah, I really like the look of the spot I've got it in at the moment, and I see no reason why it's not going to be happy there long term. I will absolutely continue to keep you updated, but from what I know about this plant and from growing it over the years, I feel like that is probably going to be a spot in which this plant will thrive. The only other thing that I will say, and this is maybe why I haven't actually thought about this that well yet, is that this is a Calathea, and Calatheas do enjoy really quite high levels of humidity. I would say, depending on what the natural humidity of your home is, anything above like 55% would probably be okay for this one. However, I have actually set the majority of my bedroom windowsill-wise up as kind of like a cacti succulent zone, so maybe I might need to look into putting a little humidifier next to this plant or something. I'm not sure. So far, so good. But like I say, I'll let you know what other measures I put in place. For the time being, lighting-wise, I think it's going to be happy. And then the next one is the Aglaonema white lance. And oh my goodness, I've spoken to you before about Aglaonema as a genus. There are so many different types I could talk about because it is just all round a fantastic genus of plants. It really is. Most of them do grow really beautifully in lower levels of light. I have got, I mean, in pretty much every single dark corner of my home, I've got an Aglaonema. There's a couple on this list, in fact, because they're just so diverse and they're so beautiful. And they're so easy to grow as well. I think if you are fairly new to houseplants or you're just looking to add a little bit more without it feeling overwhelming, they are a really good one to go for. The reason I love the white lance is because, again, similarly to what I said about the orbifolia, it's got such pale foliage, which in a dark spot really helps to brighten it up. But they're almost like the beginner's Calathea, because I know I just said this one could be a bit of a drama queen. This one has the same kind of variety and colourful foliage and ticks a lot of the same boxes. However, it's not very susceptible to pests. It's very drought tolerant, and it's just a very hardy plant. This one is also better at giving you signs if it's not happy, whereas I have noticed with things like Calathea, often if they start going downhill, it can happen very quickly. Like, I've known Calathea start to go downhill within the space of a couple of days, and by the time you really notice it, it's like, oh my god, it's a huge issue. Whereas with this one, like, to be completely honest, this one has not always been looking as lovely and healthy and perfect as it is at the moment. This was actually at one point in my friend Emma's collection, and I got it off her, and the plants did become a little bit neglected in my collection. I went through a slight period of plant burnout for a while, and this is one of the ones that I was just like, I can ignore it, it'll be fine. And it did suffer a little bit. However, it has very much bounced back, and it's just looking gorgeous. And the spot that I'm growing it in at the moment is, I would say, on the upper end of low light. As you can see, it has got a little bit of direct light from that window, but it's about 2 meters back from the window, so I would still consider it to be a low light spot. I've got, as I say, other Aglaonemas in other areas of my home that are potentially an even lower light than that. So yeah, it's very resilient, and it's just a really joyous plant to grow. Like, genuinely, I love Aglaonema. I know I've made videos on it and I have waffled on about it so much over the years. I've got another one next to me as well, which I wasn't going to show you, but the Aglaonema Cutlass. This is another firm favourite in my collection. Honestly, I could get all the Aglaonema. They are just the greatest. They're also not ones that need any kind of special levels of humidity. Like, standard room humidity is fine. Even if you don't have a humidifier, I would say anything upwards of about 40% would be okay. Yeah, they're just great plants. But the next one, oh my goodness, so I feel really bad. The next one I'm going to show you is a beautiful Begonia hybrid that has grown amazingly in lower levels of light for me. And I was very kindly given this from someone on my Patreon. And we said at the time, because it's an unusual hybrid, we were going to name this after your grandma, whose plant it came from. And I cannot for the life of me remember your grandma's name. So please comment it down below or drop me a message and I will try to refer to it as that from now on. But this is what it looks like. It is so beautiful. And it's actually a Begonia acontifolia cross coccinea. And yeah, it's just an incredible hybrid of plants. It almost looks like fireworks, you know? It's got these beautiful, dark, dramatic leaves with this gorgeous, splashy pinkiness. But then if you look at the back of the leaves, it's really red. It's just such a lovely, lovely plant. And at the moment, I'm actually growing it just down there on the bottom shelf of my shelves. And the top shelves are ones where I've got my grow lights, and the bottom shelves tend to be for plants that are better in, I would say, kind of like medium light. And I know that I'm talking about low light plants and I'm saying I'm growing it in a medium light spot. As I say, this is such early days for me in this space. I am still very much experimenting and figuring things out with my plants. But this is one that lived very, very happily in a lower light spot when I was at the flat. So I know it's lived and grown and got bigger as well. Like, these leaves are sizing up hugely in lower light. I looked at both the parent plants as well, and I believe they're both native to Brazil, the Coquina and Acontifolia, and both of those are said to do very well in lower levels of light as well, so it does make sense. But also, if you look at the main stem of this plant, it's really, really kind of chunking up. So I feel like at some point maybe I could grow it into almost like a beautiful low light tree. That would be very exciting. But yeah, also bearing in mind I am quite new in the grand scheme of things to Begonia. I've only really got into Begonia as a genus over the last year. This has been hands down one of my easiest. It's currently growing in semi-hydro, which seems to be keeping the plant really happy. And in fact, it's just growing in the little cup I got it in when I was given the plant. So part of me is like, maybe I should mix it up, maybe I should do something new for it, but also it's clearly responding well and it's giving me lovely growth. So I think for the time being, I might just leave it be. But as I say, it has got a lovely story behind it. It did come from this lovely person's grandma, I think in Spain, and it was brought over to the UK. I think I'm right in saying that, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's just a really lovely one. I feel very lucky to own it, and it has been an absolute pleasure to grow. And then this is another one that I actually showed you the other day because it's one that I have completely chopped up since I moved in here, and it is my Hoya pubicalyx Hawaiian. And although since chopping it up to propagate, I have moved it again to one of my shelves through here, so it's kind of getting medium to bright light, I know for a fact this is a plant that does amazingly in lower levels of light, because when I was living back at the flat, this one grew on top of my fridge, which was potentially the lowest light spot in my whole flat. I'll try and find some clips if I possibly can, but if you go back to my houseplant tour or something like that, you'll be able to see it. It put out so much growth there and was just continuously happy. But as I say, when I chopped it up and decided to kind of reset the plant, I was like, If it was that fast to grow in low light, why not see what it does in higher levels of light, especially now I've kind of got the space to do so. But I didn't fully chop the plant up. I have left some sections on the mother plant, so I've got that through in my kitchen at the moment, which again I'll put a clip in of, and I would say that's in kind of like a low to medium light spot. I know it's about 1.5 meters back from a window, but that's a window that doesn't get a huge amount of light. I think because our garden is so high up, it blocks any direct sun or anything like that. But yeah, it's just a really gorgeous one. And it's very similar to the standard Hoya pubicalyx. The only difference between it, and in fact, I don't actually have any example of new growth to show you at the moment, but the only difference between it is that when the new growth does come in, I'd say that's like the newest growth it's got, but it's not that obvious. When the new growth does come in, it comes in really purpley, and it's so pretty. And then as it kind of matures and hardens off, it fades to this gorgeous green colour. And I just find it a really lovely Hoya to grow. Again, it's a very easy plant. Hoya as a genus is also non-toxic, so if you're looking for something that is like pet safe, child safe, it's a great option. It also is insanely quick to propagate. I chopped this plant up less than 2 weeks ago, and already you can see it's got pretty decent roots starting to form. So I do think this is one that's going to root very quickly and will probably be ready to be potted up again. I don't know yet if I'm going to pot it up with the mother plant. I kind of like the idea of playing about with this plant in different conditions just to kind of see how it does. But yeah, as I say, I have for my entire time pretty much of owning this plant been growing it as a low light plant, and I know it does very well. So I still thought that I would include it on this list. And another Aglaonema that I absolutely love is this one here, which I actually didn't have an accurate idea on when I first got, but I know that Grow Tropicals are currently selling it as an ivy green, so that is what I'm going to go with. But again, just look at that foliage. Isn't it just gorgeous? And this is another one that is growing in maybe, again, the lowest light spot down here. I know when I have like shot clips of my living room, it looks lovely and bright, but actually when you turn all the lights off, it's a west facing window, which doesn't let in a lot of direct sun. And also this one is kind of like tucked round the corner. You'll see from the clips, but it's tucked around the corner on a shelf. And so it is in very low light. And again, I know it's early days, but because I was growing this plant just up by the mezzanine through in the bedroom before I moved house, that spot was offering a similar level of light to what it's getting here. So I do believe that the plant will be happy in this spot. But yeah, again, like just look at the stripiness of the foliage. This is the genus that I was saying is kind of like a beginner's Calathea because it is just so wonderful. The only annoying thing with Aglaonema is that it's not pet friendly. I believe you have to eat it in pretty large quantities for it to be toxic, but it's not one that I would recommend trying it with. And as you can see, this one here is actually also currently putting out some little flowers. And although you absolutely can let the plant go ahead and flower, I personally think unless you are planning on pollinating, which is something that I've actually never done with an Aglaonema, unless you're planning on pollinating that plant, I will usually just chop those flowers off or just snap them off like that, just because then my plant can focus on putting its energy into foliage as opposed to flowers. You don't have to do that, but firstly, the flowers they don't really look like flowers. They're more just like inflorescences and they don't look particularly nice. And as I say, in the time that plants are flowering, a lot of the time they will kind of put a halt to putting out foliage because it does require so much energy from the plant. But yeah, this is another one that I do very little to keep happy. I do wait for its soil to probably dry out to like 50–60%. I'll stick my finger down into it, and when it feels pretty dry, that's when I'll go ahead and water it again. I think because it's one that lives in such a low light spot as well, it really doesn't require water very often. I water it, I would say on average about once every 3 weeks or so, something like that. And this is actually one of the Aglaonemas in my collection that I do grow in soil. And that's not for any particular reason. I think it's mainly just because I haven't got around to transferring it into semi-hydro yet. But a lot of my other Aglaonema do grow in semi-hydro and they are so happy like that. And that just makes your life even easier as well, because all you need to do then is just fill up reservoirs. So at some point, I will probably do that for this plant. But no, again, it's a lovely one. It's a very resilient one, very adaptable, no special humidity required. It's just great. And then maybe this is an obvious choice, but it's one that I just don't speak about that much because I think that it's going to be an obvious choice, and maybe it's not to some of you. So how can I not include a good old Pothos plant? I have got so many Epipremnum varieties and just like standard Epipremnum in my collection. I've got one that I'm looking at kind of hanging down in a very, very dark corner in my dining room. I've got various ones that I've trained to kind of climb and trail and stuff like that. So they're such good ones if you want to just add like a little bit of greenery, like a creeping vine or something like that. And they will, oh hello sweetheart, they will grow pretty happily in pretty much any spot. And I say that again because I have grown Pothos plants over the years in a variety of conditions. They can be acclimated to take full sun, and if you're trying to get them to really size up, then obviously the higher light the better. But they do very well and can actually thrive in lower levels too. This plant here I've got growing on top of my cabinet, which although my cabinet houses grow lights, this doesn't actually get much of the light from them at all. And I guess it kind of gets a little bit of like indirect light from this space, but most of what you actually see behind me here, lighting wise, is provided by grow lights because I've got my big Sansi bulbs in here. So yeah, it's just a very easy, very hardy, drought-tolerant, resilient plant that again grows like a weed. In fact, I do believe this one is native to French Polynesia, I think, the Society Islands, if I remember that correctly, where it is actually considered to be an invasive species. I think there's lots of places in the world that it's kind of like the Britain's ivy. So anything that is invasive is typically quite a good one to go for if you're a beginner to houseplants and you want something that is deemed, I say unkillable, no plant is unkillable, but something that is going to be harder to kill because it's invasive for a reason, you know, it just grows and grows and grows and it's very tolerant of lots of things. But yeah, I won't spend too much time talking about this one because I know it's one that most of us are familiar with, but I do just think it's popular for a reason. It's such a great plant and it's just perfect for filling dark corners. I'm not sure what Yoli is actually doing. What are you doing, baby girl? I'm wondering if maybe she's come over here and now she can't figure out that she can actually walk past the camera. Do you want to go that way? Or would you just like to stay here and watch? Would you like to stay here and watch? Or maybe we do that. Okay. Right, the next plant, actually, I'm going to get down and show you because it is my Scindapsus. So this is one that actually is not that practical to do with Yoli here because it is like crazily long. In fact, I might tilt the camera up and show you this one. Yeah, so this is currently the length of my Scindapsus exotica, and this is another one that, as I say, I am, now that I've moved, growing in this space, but it has been growing in really quite low light in my flat, and it has been growing extremely quickly. I have considered chopping and propagating this plant. However, I'm also kind of thinking I want to do like a cool decor setup here, and I'm thinking maybe I might try and get it climbing up that wall there. I'm not quite sure. But again, like I just said about the Pothos plant, it is a very easy one to train should I want to do more of a fun setup with it in that way. But yeah, the Scindapsus exotica has just got the most beautiful, beautiful leaves. They're obviously really silvery and they're super, super velvety as well. And it's another one that is really easy to grow. It honestly, touch wood, hasn't given me any issues in my time of growing it. And I've had various types of Scindapsus over the years, but this one is really just like a weed. It just keeps going and going and going. There are also a few different ways that you can go about growing this plant. Obviously, I am growing it as a hanging, trailing plant, trailing along the floor. But you can also grow it as a moss pole plant. It is naturally a climber, so you can either train it to climb, I was going to say other plants, like I've seen people do some cool setups where this one kind of attaches to different moss poles. I think it looks amazing. I personally would find that an absolute nightmare because it roots into things so quickly to kind of support itself and grip on and climb. And then if it's attached to lots of different plants, you're going to have to do lots of chops, and it just sounds stressful to me, but it can look lovely. The thing that I just really love, I mean, Scindapsus as a genus is just a really, really lovely one. But the thing I really love about this one is just that every single leaf is kind of like a fingerprint. It's so different. Like I've had some leaves that are almost completely pure silver. And the interesting thing about Scindapsus as well, and this is a fun fact, is that it has this incredible ability to be able to mimic other species of Scindapsus that it's not. And I don't think anyone really knows the reason as to why this plant can do this. But for example, this one could start producing leaves that looked very much like the tricolour or the silverian or something like that for no apparent reason. And I think a lot of the time people get inaccurate IDs on the Scindapsus if it's only got 1 or 2 leaves, because sometimes it can be quite difficult to tell initially. But yeah, as I say, I'd quite like to do a fun setup with this plant, maybe training it to climb or something like that soon. So if you would like to see that, do let me know. And then I spoke about this one the other day, and it is such a wonderful, wonderful low light plant. This is the Maranta, Maranta lemon lime. And this is a plant that I've always loved the Maranta. Like there's loads of different types of Maranta as well, but the lemon lime is one that has really, really had my heart just because of the vibrancy of it. Again, like similarly to what I've said about a couple of others, you can put this one in a low light spot and it just brings so much light and life to that area. And I spoke about this one in my updates video the other day because I have currently got this again in a really, really low light spot that I looked at and I was like, is that going to be too dark for this plant? It is actually darker than the spot that I was growing this plant in before. And while I know this plant is capable of doing quite well in lower light, I was like, I don't know if that's going to be too much. However, it has put out so much new growth already. Like, as you can see, it's got a new leaf there. That's a new leaf. It's got a new leaf there. It is literally pumping out the new growth right now. So I feel like that's a good sign. It's also a plant that is so easy to propagate. Like you can literally chop it like a pothos plant, stick it in water, and it will root really, really easily. So at some point, and you know what, maybe I should do this soon. I was going to say at some point, if you want to get it to fill out a little bit, you could chop it. And I'm looking at this, and although it's not a fuller plant, really we're looking at like 2 sections of growth. And if I wanted to create a little bit more fullness and bushiness to this plant, then I could take some cuttings and then pop them back in the top of the pot. And maybe I will do that. I don't know. But yeah, it's a really lovely one. Again, it's not difficult. It's definitely not a difficult plant, and I wouldn't put it in the same league. Darling, you look so lost. I wouldn't put it in the same league as something like a Calathea, although they are both in the Marantaceae family. The only thing I would say with Maranta is that for me, I found them to be really quite susceptible to things like mealybugs, which you wouldn't necessarily have thought of looking at this plant. Like typically mealybugs will go for things that are much more succulent, but I think because the nodes of this plant are really quite, I guess they are kind of waxy, mealybugs can often get right into the nodes there in between the new leaves, and they can bring a plant down quite quickly. And I have lost Marantas to mealybugs over the years. So yeah, that is just something to look out for. But aside from that, oh, is it very nice? Aside from that, it is a really, really great plant. Just a side note, but Yoli went to the vet and had to have her ear syringed earlier. So maybe that's why she's a little bit clingy. It wasn't very nice, was it? No, it wasn't. Although you did very well. But then another one that I know I have spoken about before because I think it is just wonderful is the Hoya wayetii, and this is another one that can do amazingly well in lower levels of light. I had this hanging on my hanging rail back at the old flat and it did really good things there, and since I've moved I'm growing it on the fireplace, kind of trailing down, and that is, I would definitely consider that to be a low light spot. That's almost on par with where the Maranta is, I would say. It's about 3 meters back from a west-facing window, so definitely not the brightest of positions. But although this one is very, very slow to grow in lower levels of light, the growth that it does give you doesn't seem to be affected size-wise. Mine hasn't put out any new growth since I've lived here, but as I say, it has only been a few weeks. And it's also a Hoya that can grow really well as a hanging or trailing plant and doesn't typically need to be on a trellis, because there's a lot of types of Hoya that will really kind of want to climb and tendril. This one typically is perfectly fine just like this. So if you're looking for something just to add a little bit of texture, then I think this is a really, really good one. Again though, as I say, on the note of mealybugs, Hoyas in general can be a real nightmare for mealybugs, and this is one that I have had mealybugs on before. And although it looks absolutely fine now, it was, I think, 6 months ago or so that I had mealybugs on this plant. It was a bit of a nightmare to treat. I had to get into all of the little cracks and crevices, but it is fairly resilient. Obviously it has bounced back well, and it's growing really well for me now. So yeah, it is another one that I would highly recommend. Go on then, go on. There you go, you are allowed to leave. There we go, she's gone to her bed. But the last plant is one that I have spoken about and shown on my channel, but not for a very long time, because I actually haven't had this plant in my collection for 3 years, almost 3 years. And again, maybe it's quite a standard one, but I think it's a really lovely one. And it is the peace lily. And I had a peace lily when I was living back at my mum's house. It was one that I grew down in my basement bedroom with me. And it was one of the plants down there that I was just like, I don't have to worry about a thing. It's just fine. My basement bedroom had, I think they were west-facing windows, but they were very, very small windows. It was like grow like galore in spots that I was growing plants down there. And when I moved to my new flats, which was 2 years ago now, although I wanted to take all of my plants with me, my mum was also just starting to get into houseplants, and I actually left my peace lily for her. And it is still going, and love my mum as I do. She's definitely more of an outdoor gardener a lot of the time as opposed to an indoor gardener. And the peace lily is one that it doesn't appear to have given her any grief. Like whenever I go around there, it looks really happy, really healthy. And yeah, I've been looking for a low light plant to fill a corner we've got in the bedroom. I did have another plant there, and I've just had a bit of a switch up because I'm just playing about with plants in different places. And I was in a garden centre with a friend the other day, and this was reduced, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's so lovely. And it's so perfect for the spot that I'm looking to fill. So I decided that I would get it. But yeah, the important thing to remember with peace lilies, and I would say this is probably one of the most important things, is that because it is in the lily family, these bits here, which look like flowers, these are actually just shield leaves, and these are the flowers here. When these are actively producing pollen, you do need to be very, very careful if you've got pets, because if you've got particularly cats, if they're brushing up against them and then licking themselves, it can be, I think it can be fatal. It can be very, very, very toxic. And I know, like, the reason that I learned about this actually is because whenever my mum would get lilies when I was a child, she would always chop the middles off them, the bits that produce pollen, because she was worried about the animals. So yeah, if like I grow this one up high now anyway, but if it does start giving me inflorescences that are producing pollen, I will just be very, very mindful of the fact that I do have a dog, and I won't be taking it down and letting her kind of brush up against it lots. At the moment, it doesn't seem to be producing any pollen, but that is just something to think about. But the foliage of this plant, I think as well, because I've got quite a big one here, is just so glossy and gorgeous. Like the one that I had before, although it was growing well for me, it never grew to be quite this big. And oh, this is just very exciting for me. I would have never been able to bring, I've never sensibly been able to bring a plant this size into my collection before moving here, because I just wouldn't have had the space. And to be able to have just gone out and like got this gorgeous plant and put it in a spot, I'm just like, oh, I feel incredibly fortunate, incredibly fortunate. But yeah, as I say, it is a wonderful low light plant, very easy to grow, very drought tolerant again. Is one that doesn't need like crazy levels of humidity. So again, like it's perfect for like anywhere. It's a really, really good one. It's also one that is typically very good at showing you the signs when it's not happy. The only issue that I have personally encountered with my peace lily before, my old peace lily, I remember it's one of the first plants that I discovered root rot on, which typically happens when you give your plant water at a time it doesn't need it. So I would always recommend keeping your plants in their nursery pots and just lifting them out and like watering them and letting all that excess water drain off them first before putting them back into something like this, which is a ceramic pot with no drainage. So yeah, again, it's one that I will wait not to completely dry out, but again, like 60-70% dry before I go ahead and water it. And yeah, it's just a great plant. I would say a great beginner plant if you're just kind of getting into houseplants, or as I say, want to add something a little bit easier to your collection. But yes, those are the 10 that I've got for today's video. As I say, if you want 10 more, or you just want to get a little bit of a better understanding about lower levels of light, then I will link the other video that I made down below. But I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Stay sexy, plant lovers.